Good morning, everybody. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of Cabinet Committee Regeneration on Wednesday, the 4th of October from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 10:01 a.m. My name is Councillor Martin Todd, Chairperson of the Cabinet and Cabinet Member for Asset Management. This meeting is being live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on, and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. Please can everyone ensure their mobile phones are on silent, and can I remind members to use their microphones so that people watching online can hear what's being said. In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Can I welcome members of the public to this meeting this morning, and I will invite you forward when it's time to make your contribution. Turning to the agenda. The first item is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
I believe we have apologies from Councillor Loney, for whom Councillor Porter is deputising.
Thank you. Do we know where Councillor Bolton is, or on his way? Good. I hope he's able to get here. The second item is disclosures of interest. I need to declare a personal non-prejudicial interest, since there are some issues that relate to matters that are the responsibility of the County Council, and I am a County Councillor. Look, we won't be making any decisions, so it's personal.
Thank you, Chairman. I also am personal but non-prejudicial interest, because I'm also a County Councillor, although I don't see anything here where I would be a decision maker there.
The third item of business is a request from councillors to speak, and I have a request from Councillor Lee to speak on both items. Is that correct? But you'd like to do it as a single deputation? Okay, so I'll take you when we I'll take you just before the first presentation. And we also, on public participation, we have John Beveridge from the City Winchester Trust, and that's to speak on item 7. Is that correct? Good, thank you. The next item to cover is the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 7th of June 2023. Are those who are present happy to approve those as an accurate record of the meeting? Thank you. The next item is Chair's announcements. I think everything I might want to say is covered by the presentations in the agenda. So that brings us to item 7, which is the update on Central Winchester Regeneration. We have 2 deputations that we'll take first. Mr. Beveridge, do you actually, sorry, should we introduce the paper? Do the presentation first, or Ms. Beveridge, would you like to wait for the presentation or get stuck in? It's your choice. Why don't we take the deputations first, and that way, why don't you come forward first, and that way any of the points you raise can be addressed during the presentation, hopefully.
Chairman, thank you. I'm speaking, as you said, on behalf of the City Winchester Trust. I just want to comment on the movements section, which is mentioned in the update on the Central Winchester Regeneration area, which you're going to talk about today. This includes a lot of laudable intentions about seeking change in the way movement is to be addressed in the development, emphasising much reduced role for cars and making connections beyond the red line of the development. The Trust questions whether this can be achieved satisfactorily, given the way the Winchester movement strategy is being implemented since its adoption in 2019, and currently has 10 individual unconnected initiatives for the next 10 years. On several occasions, the Trust has called for a citywide plan for movement, setting out a long-term vision of how vehicular traffic is to be managed around Winchester and active travel improved. In 2020, the movement strategy seemed to be heading in that direction when consultants Atkins submitted 4 options of how traffic could be routed in a way that removed traffic from some streets and gave priority to buses and relevant service vehicles. These were discussed informally, but nothing further has been heard about them, which is disappointing, as some of them were excitingly radical. If the county and city councils are going to continue with the current piecemeal approach to managing vehicle movement and active travel routes in Winchester, we question whether Jigsaw can be confident and clear about how they can plan for movement in and through the development and making connections beyond the red line when it's not clear how movement throughout Winchester should be managed and changed in the longer term. This question also applies to other big developments in the city like Station Approach, but it's particularly relevant to the central area of Winchester. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beveridge, and we will seek to address that, I think, when we come to the presentation, and also as somebody with quite a lot of knowledge of the situation, I can provide further insight as somebody who was involved in those works in 2020. And the second deputation is from Councillor Lee, who wants to talk against both. Is that correct?
Thank you, Leader. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My comments and questions refer to both agenda items 7 and 8, overarching. Regeneration, of course, is a powerful tool for creating more sustainable, livable and equitable places if done with best due care and attention for the new environmental cost challenges we all face. These 2 master plans for the regeneration of central Winchester and Station Approach are key to revitalising and improving our existing urban spaces and providing some great opportunities for our city. Most welcome. Of course, each project with its own master plan must demonstrate individual viability and best fit for people, communities and protection of our environment. It goes without saying, fundamental success in creating regenerative places will be the strongest considerations to mitigating the financial, the energy, the transport, climate and nature crises for people, communities and businesses, with exemplary examples for the best sustainable green economy for our well-being. I suggest that means leveraging synergies across the spectrum of all regen and big developments in our area and perhaps even wider Hampshire. With this in mind, I'm concerned that the Station Approach master plan doesn't capture all opportunities and risks. Granted, the gestation of the Station Approach master plan is ahead of the Central Winchester Regeneration master plan, and no doubt there will be a similar risk register to that of the Station Approach to be created in due course. I note the interconnectedness has been recognised between all regen or big developments in the Winchester district, as is captured under, I think, the timing risk SR4 for the Station Approach master plan, which includes the Central Winchester Regeneration, Station Approach, the former leisure centre, N3 Junction 9, Sir John Moore's Barracks, Northern PNR, Bar End and Bushfields. Of course, each of these projects will run independently, but there will be opportunities for cross-collaboration to leverage potential savings and deal with deconflictions and mitigation of impacts, plus creation of co-benefits for our well-being. To my mind, this points to the need for an overarching master plan for regen in our district. Do we have an overarching master plan for all these developments with a master risk register? If not, can we create these useful tools? That's my first question. And I firmly believe we must avoid each master plan being viewed as separate rather than as an essential part of an integrated ecosystem of plans for our city and district's built and natural environment. With the planet's current needs and dangers, it's imperative to do more than just sustain the natural environment. We must also restore its processes. The heavily cited fact that the developments in the built environment can account for up to 40% of carbon emissions, and that the built environment directly affects and transforms our habitats, species, natural ecosystems into diverse assemblages of built materials, buildings, small green spaces, parking lots and roadways will continue to cause alarm. These concerning impacts put immense responsibility on us as a council with our declared climate and nature emergencies. So can I ask for all our master plans to include risks for climate change and carbon emissions, whole life carbon emissions, please, and natural environment impacts? Furthermore, if there's a need to risk reduce our cost and environmental impacts for council housing across Hampshire, can Winchester combine with other local authorities to derive common benefits? This might be for materials, build techniques, very scarce skills, still scarce sets, product supply with cost reduction opportunities for the housing schemes and the aforementioned projects. I believe other local authorities have done something like this for local housing. Can I suggest it might therefore be prudent to also add to our own housing programme to the master plan risk registers and the proposed overarching master plan and risk register? This creates a clear line of sight to 9 projects, all interlinked in different ways with co-benefits and enhancements for mitigating common risks. There are competing challenges and needs for limited resources and skills, as I mentioned, and impacts which need to be revealed and understood early in our master planning processes. Can this be done? That's my third question. I note there's a regen board with Hampshire County Council to monitor all major regeneration projects within the area. Can I ask if this regen board has a risk register for wider Hampshire projects, and does it dovetail with the style of risk registers that we are seeing at the moment? And finally, my final question, Chair, you mentioned the demise of the Hampshire County deal at full council. Can I ask if the cancellation of the Hampshire County deal with benefits for economic strategy focus on the general direction of travel towards greater economic decision making at a local level, the creation of an investment fund as part of the county deal is going to hamper Winchester regeneration, developing our green economy for Winchester? If so, what are the consequences, and are there any mitigating action should be taken now in terms of our risk thinking? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Lee. Well, you've given us a few matters of food for thought. We will attempt to address those between us all as we go through. In terms of the approach, what I suggest we do, I have made notes of all those questions, and the original intention was that we would run through the presentation and then have the questions, and I think we will do that at that point. I'll perhaps start by taking some of those questions when we've had the presentation and had an opportunity to see what's on the table. So if I could ask, so who is presenting? Mr. Bakey. Okay, good. If you could take us through the presentation and introduce everybody, since we that would be very helpful for the record, so people watching can. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'm doing a bit of a double act today with colleagues from Jigsaw. I have Matt Roger on my left in the grey jacket and Warwick Smither in the white shirt. I have a couple of slides to just provide an update on some of the activities that the council has been doing, and then I'm going to hand over to these colleagues to then run through the engagement work that they've been doing since the summer. I think you'll recall the last Regen committee had a presentation about set out what they were going to do, so they'll confirm what they've been doing, and it will indeed pick up some of the issues I think that have been raised, and we can answer the questions perhaps at the end. So our update on the council side is really just covering King's Walk, the archaeological works that are underway, the Friarsgate Medical Centre, which is in the process of being demolished, and then we'll move on to an update from Jigsaw. This is just really to note that the works to refurbish King's Walks were completed on the 15th of August. Quite a lot of positive comment in the local press and from local residents about what a difference it's made to this part of Winchester. There was a successful open day organised primarily by the traders last Saturday, the 29th, which I know quite a few people attended, and certainly colleagues from Jigsaw were there as well. So that's just to note that that work's been done. The council's contribution is within budget, and that has made a big difference to this part of the city centre. Archaeology, again, we had an update previously on this. The work started on the 4th of July. We've had one open day with local residents turning up. There's another open day due on the 7th of October. And I suppose what I would draw attention to in the pictures is just the scale of and the depth of the trenches that are being dug. You'll see the bottom right-hand picture. That trench is being held up with props to make sure that it's safe for people to dig in. That work is due to finish in November. And a bit of a teaser, because Tracy's told me they have found some interesting things in the trenches. They are hoping to get the dating back for those in time to have those available to members of the public on the 7th of October. She wouldn't even tell me what they are, Chair, so I'm afraid I can't offer even a glimpse of what they might be. But certainly something to work out, look out for. She's quite excited about this. I mentioned Friarsgate. The demolition contractor has been doing soft strip internally, and that work is coming to a close. We will have the machinery on site to actually demolish the building later on in October. And so that work is all proceeding to plan. The building will be down and gone by Christmas. We're about to go out to tender, colleagues in the council are about to go out to tender for the final set of works that will actually then lay out the final bit of land, with works hoping to start on that interesting design by January, February. It is dependent on the weather because it is groundworks. They are right next to the River Itchen as well. It is wet, but they're hoping that they will be finished, those works, certainly around about May time. It's about 3 months work to do. I'm going to hand over now to colleagues from Jigsaw and let them continue and share the work that they've been doing, some of which is people from the council have been involved, both members and officers in that work over the last 3 or 4 months.
Thank you, Ken. So just to echo what Ken has just said there with regards to we presented back in June time. My colleague John Norden set out our engagement strategy for the 6 months, and this is it's an interim update that sort of summarises what we've done, as well as takes a look at the remaining period and the next steps. This was the roadmap that we looked at back in June. We have started our coffee mornings and our engagements with local stakeholders, including local businesses, local landowners, and stakeholders from Winchester officer groups, as well as members of the public. We've taken the stakeholder map and have developed that further, ensuring that we're reaching as many people and relevant people as possible within the workshops that we've set out. We've undertaken 4 thematic workshops, and that's really the main sort of meat and bones of this presentation, where we'll delve into the process that we went through in those workshops, as well as some of the findings that have come out. The next item on the roadmap there is just a note on our Commonplace platform. Very much encourage all members of the public to register on the Commonplace platform. It is our main platform for communication. And I suppose it's worth noting that we've got 2 approaches to our stakeholder engagement, one being active and one being passive. Our active engagement takes the form of meeting people face to face, running workshops, coffee mornings, the meet and greets, the reaching out to the districts that we're now doing with our roadshow of 4 workshops going out to the district. And then our passive process, we call it a passive process not because it's not dynamic. We call it a passive process because it actually allows people to come to us And it is the commonplace platform that is the main part of that passive engagement. So really would encourage people to register and to reach out to us through that platform. As I said, we ran 4 workshops, the first being Heritage and Culture, the second workshop being Live, Play and Work. We toyed with the title of that one. Really, it's about land use, but we've sort of decided that land use wasn't the most enticing of titles to encourage people to join. So Live, Play and Work, it's really about what's inside the buildings. The third workshop, not the second workshop is on this presentation, but the third workshop was around environment, and the fourth workshop was around movement. The process itself took the form of inviting the stakeholders in. Each stakeholder was asked to bring 2 photographs that they felt was representative of the theme, together with an observation or a provocation that they had related to the theme. The group were invited to discuss the photograph, jot down ideas, reactions, again provocations, challenges to those photographs, and those they were jotted down on post-it notes. Those post-it notes were set to one side as we ran through a series of the photographs. At the end of the photo round, we asked the group to set out what they felt were the sub-themes of the discussion that had just taken place. And it's important to note that we in this process have acted as facilitator, and these are themes that have come out of the stakeholders. This is direct feedback from the stakeholders themselves, rather than this isn't a jigsaw voice, this is a Winchester stakeholder voice. Following the definition of the sub-themes, we broke the groups down into smaller groups headed by sub-theme, and we brought back the post-it notes, criticisms, observations, provocations, etc., which were then clustered under those sub-themes. And we'll go through each of the workshops and look at some of the points that came out from that. The last item on this slide is around future actions and ideas. And this is where we asked the stakeholder groups to identify what the CWR area, as distinct from the wider Winchester area, could contribute to achieving some of the goals or addressing some of the themes that arose over a 12-month period, together with over a 5 or 10 year period. And that's the bit I'm not going to talk about today. That's the bit I'm going to talk about next time. First item here, heritage and culture. This was around identity, tradition, inclusivity, and how both Winchester and CWR contributing to Winchester as a whole could influence that. I'll try not to read all of this. I'll just pick out the key themes that arose. So the sub groupings that arose were around data. There was a lot of conversation around the availability of data. There's a lot of interested and very active stakeholder groups in the area that each have their own sets of data, whether that be to do with businesses, whether that be the officers themselves, to do with residents. And we're very keen as development partner to help facilitate the collation of that data and to look at it in its totality, rather than potentially as distinct groups. There's a lot of discussion around curation and inclusive vision. You know, the need to look at the bigger picture was a common theme, and also brand, the identity and the brand of Winchester, and possibly as distinct from the identity and brand of the Central Winchester Regeneration. Live, work and play. This is where we talked about what the buildings themselves might actually offer. Any future buildings, no buildings have been designed as yet. This is all about helping to craft the design brief for the future. First statement there is an important one around flexibility. You know, the oldest building in Winchester is in excess of 500 years old. Let's not design something and build something now that only lasts for 50 or 75 years. It's we need to be designing flexibility in use and flexibility in design. Community and curating, again, coming out as a theme. This idea that it shouldn't be designed in a silo. This is something that needs to connect, and it needs to be for the community. There was quite a focus on mix and use and around bolstering the entrepreneurial scene, developing out of King's Walk, as well as sort of integrating additional work and leisure opportunities. Last point there, missing link. It's, the Central Winchester Regeneration Zone sits right there in the very heart of the city. It is a missing link. It can be used as a catalyst to connect other parts of the city. Environment. Big focus on nature-based solutions. We talked a little around the supplementary planning document and the desire to really build on the history of Winchester and its waterways. The SPD obviously setting out some guidance and an observation around the waterway that runs through the bus station site. We're very keen to see that come forward, as were the stakeholders in this workshop. Green economy and sharing, looking to the uses that might come forward as workspaces. How can we make the microeconomy within that zone as circular as possible? Are there opportunities for sharing? Library of things as an example. Is there a way that we can really help to build that kind of micro environment? And environment, and you'll see later on here that some of these themes start to sit very neatly within a Venn diagram. And so within the conversation of environment, we've sort of drifted towards movement with conversation around active travel and spaces. Prioritising how people move around was an important consideration when thinking about the future environment of the CWR area. Finally, movement. Key number one item came out. That was a desire from the stakeholders to discourage car use. And I think the second point there is probably related to that, which is around consensus building and communication. How might one facilitate a discouragement of cars use? Well, I think consensus building and communication is important. With regards to the comment from John Beveridge earlier, with regards to the laudable intentions, I think, yes, the observations acknowledged, and I think as Jigsaw, we're a key stakeholder in this process, and I think we will continue to influence and advocate for the laudable ambitions set out herein, and I think we'll continue to work very closely with Winchester's officers to sort of see where these things can be integrated. Last couple of items there. Rebalancing competing demands. We know the points of friction within the movement network in that area, and ultimately hoping to achieve more permeability and legibility. You can see that how we've started to summarise the overlapping elements that have come out across the 4 themed workshops. We'll continue to develop and nuance this as we move into the next part of our co-creation, but it's there as an initial framework, and you can start to see things like sustainability and movement having active travel and the need to rebalance as a key point of overlap. What's next? I guess the key next step for us is taking the stakeholders that are involved in those workshops and bringing them together over a further 3 co-creation workshops, where we start to take some of the findings and some of the themes that arose from the themed workshops into action plans, into briefs, into something that can start to formulate and inform a design brief that will go to our design team. We want to establish the future groups who will be there as people to hold us to account over the longer term, ideally members from the stakeholder workshops, so that they've seen the influence from the beginning, together with reaching out to local education establishments in order to set up the youth group, the voice of the youth. We think that's very important for us to be held to account on that side too.
It's our anticipation then that we'll be coming back to this forum in January to provide a summing up of this process, perhaps with a first glimpse of what that design brief might start to look like.
Great, thank you very much indeed. So we have a range of topics to talk about there. Actually, for the logic of what was being presented, what I suggest we do is we just go through each sort of section in turn, so that we have a sense of how it all fits together. So the first area that we talked about briefly was King's Walk. So any questions or comments on King's Walk in terms of the presentation?
It does look very different. And it's, I walk through it every day. And I walk through it now with more encouragement than I did 6 months ago. I think it feels a very different place. And yesterday I watched tourists ahead of me walking through it and looking at different places. So that's a really great to see that that's changed. It feels a much safer and more encouraging place. So thank you. That was done well.
Councillor Cromwell.
Yeah, thank you. If I could just add my thoughts to that. I've frequented around there for quite a while, so it was very noticeable to me. My wife happens to volunteer in Oxfam, which, as you probably know, is very, very close to King's Walk, and she hadn't realised initially that it was like that. I took her through those last week, and she just said, "Wow, it's so much better." So I hope that will translate into more footfall, and I hope that will then translate into some of those businesses there actually being more successful. And I think the nature of what's in there, I think, will create a different vibe to perhaps other parts of the city, and may hopefully be something we can build on as part of the longer term CWR in establishing that area as perhaps a slightly different quarter of the city. So I think it's a good, what's happened there, I think is reassuring, because it's as part of a long-term plan, if I dare use that phrase. It kind of gives me confidence that we're doing good things and we're delivering. So brilliant. Thank you very much for that.
Councillor Thompson.
Yes, I just wanted to add a thanks to all the other voices we've heard today about King's Walk. I think it's a really fantastic improvement of that area. And I did pop down on Saturday and came to the King's Walk Festival, which was absolutely astounding. Actually, there were so many people in and around King's Walk. It was really quite special. And I did pop into one of the businesses, Bella Crafts, and they told me that it had far exceeded their expectations. And you know, it was fantastic. So yes, I'm sure you had a bit of an influence into that taking place. So thank you for that, and thank you for all the work. I think it does look absolutely stunning, and it does of course take vision of architects to sort of come in and transform an area, and you know, that just I suppose that just is a really good demonstration of what you know, a vision can do to an area. It's a huge improvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and I'd like to, if Mr. Baker could pass on our thanks, particularly to Varian Lyons for all the work that she did on that to help drive it through, and it's really made a difference. And I was also there on Saturday, and the feedback, you know, just the energy in the area as a result of the design work that had been done was very impressive, and it draws people in there in a way that it didn't before, and the energy and the planting and everything that's been done, I think, is a big improvement. Good. No other comments or observations? Archaeology. I think we do have a process for talking about the outcomes of archaeology. I think as everybody, I don't know if there's any comments that people have there. It's a source of great excitement. I'm actually very excited about everything that's being learnt about river flows and the city's relationship with the river, which isn't as straightforward as perhaps we thought. And water flows through the city. Water flows might be a topic we come back to later. So very much looking forward. So there's an archaeological open day tomorrow on Saturday. Between 10 and 1. So they're doing what they did last time with the tent in Abbey Gardens, where people can go there and then be taken across to look at the excavations. So that's something to look forward to. And will we get a report? What's the timetable for a sort of full report back or an intermediate report back? Will that come via the archaeology working committee or will it come to this committee?
So we have an archaeology panel where absolutely the findings will be reported back to that. I think it's open to you, Chair, if you want to have a brief presentation from Tracy at the next quarterly update, which would be January. We will have the works completed by then, and I'm sure we could bring something back to this committee if you so choose.
Yes, I mean, while it's always fascinating, it's genuinely fascinating to hear the insights that we get from our expert archaeological panel. I think it would be a good chance to bring it back to this committee to just see what we've learned, and also just that knowledge of the role that archaeology plays in our development. The next item is the Friarsgate Medical Centre. I suppose that at the moment, just for clarification, I think you said this already, it's the inside that's sort of coming down and out at the moment, but we are not far from seeing the outside start to come down, and that will all be done by Christmas, is what I'm hearing. Good. Any other comments or observations on that? Right, on to the engagement update. Any questions or comments on the overall roadmap and timetable? Oh, that seems self-explanatory. Any comments on the process? I think you had some questions, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. One of the reasons that we were excited about working with Jigsaw was the imagination that you brought to the thinking about the engagement process. And for sure, there's lots of interesting stuff that's come out of the discussions you've already had. Although I have to say, it's kind of the interesting stuff that I was expecting to come out. And there aren't many outliers. And so I suppose my question is just, to what extent do you feel confident that you have reached the widest, broadest range of stakeholders and potential stakeholders who may not even yet see their relevance to the project? And looking forward, what imaginative ways of working with them, apart from workshops that you obviously done very well, what else might be in the pipeline?
Okay. To what extent? I mean, I guess the first sort of response to that is we're halfway-ish of the process, and to what extent do we feel that we're confident that we've reached all stakeholders? I think there's an element that we've reached the stakeholders that have been forthcoming, those that have an interest that have been interested in the past in the project and so on and so forth, which is possibly why there's some commonality in the outputs. So there's further work to do. There's no doubt about that. I think the process through the youth group, I think, will be very interesting for us. I think that some of our ambitions, which I won't go into here around meanwhile, will help to stimulate some further engagement, albeit that might be slightly further into the distance. Our engagement doesn't stop. from now to January, it doesn't stop. We'll be engaging all the way through. I think establishing a physical presence on the site in some way, shape or form will really help that more active engagement. I think it's noted and watch this space. I think that a further push of the passive, I think, to reach a broader group with regards to the Commonplace website. We have something like 800, 900 unique views to date. It's not enough. We think we can reach bigger numbers. We think we can reach more people. We're not finished yet.
Councillor Cromwell.
Thank you. Building on Councillor Edwards' question, and I'm sure you took on board the SPD brief and so on, so you had a view of where, what the expectations were and so on before. I guess my question is, what have you learned so far that is new or surprising, and are there any things that, if you like, from where the current engagement has kind of led you to think, oh, that actually challenges what we were expecting from what we've learned from SPDs and other previous work? Thank you.
I suppose there are sort of two points there which I've picked up, which is the enthusiasm for action, the pace at which that action might be able to take place. That I think is apparent from the conversations that we've had today, and we support that, and I think that will dovetail with our meanwhile strategy, which will form a part of the development delivery plan that we're contracted to prepare. I guess in terms of themes, what the support for the creative quarter, I think, is something also that possibly didn't leap out immediately from looking at the documentation. There is an awful lot of support for that, and I find that quite exciting. And actually, those two things dovetail quite nicely together.
Councillor Porter.
Thank you. There was a sentence which I absolutely really endorsed, which was to continue the live, work and play, which was continually delight people. And that's, I think that's what we all want for all of our environments. But two things really. One is you'd ask people to bring 2 photographs and a quote. What did you learn from that? And the second thing is the site is flat and will be very attractive to people who have limited mobility, because Notts of Winchester isn't flat. And that whole area is, but it will be a multi-levelled arrangement eventually. And I wondered if you've been engaging actively with that particular group of people, or a representative group of those people, because it will be something of great interest to that group of people who often don't come to events like you're describing. And I'm going to go to the Kingsworthy tonight to see the interest there. But I just wanted to know how you've managed to engage, particularly with a group of people who may not necessarily come out to events. And about the photos.
Okay. On the attendance, I suppose the intention is around using multiple venues, that it does provide opportunity for different needs in attendance, and I guess that's also the reason for the passive engagement, to hopefully reach people perhaps who aren't able to attend events in person at all. In terms of engaging with those groups in the longer term for future design of buildings, we haven't started designing building yet, and we absolutely will. Without a doubt, you're right, it is a flat part of the site. All of the buildings will be of the highest design standards, and therefore will be entirely inclusive in their design. With regards to what did we learn from the photographs and the live, work, play, I think inclusivity was a common theme there. So I think you've hit on the right sort of seam of interest there. Inclusivity was an important point. I I think it's something that we'll continue to develop over the course of the co-creation workshops.
That's heartening. Thank you.
Thank you. Unless there's more comments on the overall process, I suggest we, Councillor Godfrey.
Waiting to get to the end of the bit of the end. Is that?
Well, we're going to go through each of the 4 themes
Oh,
and talk about what's in there. And then there are definitely some issues that came from the deputations that came forward, which require that wider perspective. So we'll do, right. So what I'd like to do now is perhaps look at the heritage and culture sub-theme. I don't know if there are any questions or comments on that. We've touched a bit on it already with people's questions. No. And the live, work and play. And I'm very pleased to see that flexibility has made it in there. Can I see somebody's hand? No. The environment. Councillor Cutler, I know you've got views on this, and I hinted what might be coming earlier on.
It really was a question around water, about the green infrastructure, not blue infrastructure, I suppose. But there's also this other element, which I don't know has been considered, and maybe it's an early stage to consider, but the archaeology seems to suggest that there's a huge amount of water around. And obviously the opening up of the waterway is of interest and a key part of it. One of the things that struck me about the Wellbourne development just across our border is that they're producing water-based heat recovery by building lakes and things, and you will have water of a constant temperature coming through there below ground. I just wondered to what extent exploration of that aspect from an energy point of view it has been considered or will be considered.
So a ground source heat pump or something of that ilk is certainly one of the options that we'll investigate as we get to that part of the process. Our advisors, Useful Projects, are absolute experts in their field. And so we will look at all sorts of renewable energy options, including air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, and the like. Yeah,
there was the very specific thing about Wellbourne, that's water sourced heat pumps, which are slightly different again, and I just wondered if that can be included in there, given the amount of water that there is around.
Absolutely, yeah. And to the point around the groundwater, yes, we're aware of the groundwater. Yeah.
Phew. Any other comments on that section? And now movement. Oh, Councillor Thompson, was that environment or movement?
Well, it kind of covers both, but connections beyond the red line is specifically highlighted under movement. So we have got a very specific red line area, which it forms, it's part of the SPD and all of that. And so that is clearly the development area. But I was interested in that you are looking over that red line, and I just wondered whether you could say a few more, just give us a bit more of an indication as to your thoughts about areas beyond the red line, not necessarily in movement, but in, what are your thoughts basically?
I'll give a slightly hesitant answer in that the one of the next steps that we'll be undertaking is would be some survey work undertaken by a company called Space Syntax. That this is around movement, this is around people flows, and looks at helping to define edges of buildings in terms of activity and so on and so forth. And it is in helping to define routes and edges of buildings that you start to arrive at really exciting buildings. It's a bit of a next step for us, but it's certainly a high priority for us to look beyond the red line in terms of where the connections are. We obviously understand the scope that's set out within the central Winchester red line area, and the public realm that's identified as related to that red line. Those are points of focus, but actually we might be looking further out in terms of just getting a sense of the macro movement and how it impacts on our red line.
Councillor Cromoyson.
Yeah, so thank you. I noted in the movement page on the competing demands rebalance section some references to buses and so on. I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit in terms of the role of buses and how that might interact with the place and convenience for people, and scale for that matter. What are you hearing in terms of the demands from the consultation? What are people saying in that area?
Yeah, I'll just start by reinforcing that it's a summary of what we've heard, rather than a projection of our recommendation and our view. I think when you have competing demands there. You have the buses that have a perception of where they need to be. You have taxi drivers with a perception of where they need to be. You have people in cars and a perception of where they need to be, pedestrians and bikes, and priority. Our view is that it's important to rebalance things with the pedestrian at the top of that priority list. But it's also our view that buses are friends. It is important that people can use the bus network. But there are competing demands. That's what we're hearing, and we're learning a lot about that.
So I'll ask a few questions about this because it slightly ties into the discussion of the movement strategy. So I think it was slightly mischaracterised by Mr. Beveridge as a very specific set of projects that didn't have any relevance to central Winchester. Because, for example, if I look at project number 8 on the City of Winchester movement strategy, it's deliver a range of measures to improve the attractiveness of local bus services. I mean, presumably, is that an area where you're having conversations with Hampshire and with the City Council officers, and we're taking a joined up approach and the bus companies? I mean, I don't want to get into the details of where you might be coming out, but are those conversations happening? Are you part of the City of Winchester movement strategy process, for example, on buses?
Absolutely, we've met with all of those stakeholders, and we'll continue to do so.
I mean, another one of the 10 priorities is, which again is slightly mischaracterised as a very defined project as opposed to a priority, which is how it's actually written in the documentation, is creating better public spaces in the city. And obviously you have oversight and kind of guardianship of one of the ones listed, which is the Broadway, but also there's a relationship with the Lower High Street, and presumably you're thinking about better public spaces within the central Winchester regeneration area as well. Is that sort of space you're in? I mean, again,
yes, correct.
Now, one of the big enabling projects, and I think that was how it was seen, because I was involved in setting these 10 priorities that would presumably be helpful for you, and it's therefore called out as a priority as opposed to looking wider afield, is converting the eastern parts of the one-way system to two-way working. I mean, that is a hard one, and it is extraordinarily expensive. But again, is that something, that is a very concrete project looking in the short term?
It forms a part of the discussion that we're having with the stakeholders in the movement working group.
Good. And similarly, there's talk in the movement strategy, and again, I'd like reassurance that you're tied into this about providing safe cycle routes through the city centre. I mean, is that something you see yourself as being part of?
Absolutely.
And also loading bays. I mean, that's one of the big priorities. I mean, presumably we need you to be thinking as part of the joined up work that's going on at the moment about additional loading bays within the centre, timing of loading bays, access. I mean, I think it's something where actually some of the older fabric is really struggling in terms of actually waste removal as well as delivery. I mean, is that something you're tied into and you're part of those discussions?
The servicing and maintenance strategy will be absolutely integral to the design that we develop.
And when you were talking to people, were you hearing that people want some kind of big bang, Baron Haussmann style, 1972, let's demolish all the buildings on St George's Street in order to punch a road through the middle of the city? Or, because everything I've heard about Winchester and our history is that we talk about organic and incremental. And when there have been things like the plans for a dual carriageway down North Walls or the Big Bang Silver Hill, it's actually been the City of Winchester Trust that have been the first people to oppose them. So are we in a kind of organic and incremental space? Were people asking you to wait until we've had a 40 to 100 million pound programme of investment to reshape our streets before getting going on central Winchester, or do they want to kind of get on with it?
I think it's very much the latter. It's a get on with it. It's an incremental delivery is the right way.
So it's sort of incremental and organic, reflecting how the other things like, the other things that are going on with movement in the city are impacting on the centre, while still being mindful of the end point and the end objectives of the City of Winchester movement strategy. Okay, now that's helpful. I mean, are there any other questions about movement that people might have? But just a confirmation, the City of Winchester movement strategy does lay out our direction of travel for the whole city and the priorities we're working on. And inevitably, because we live in a world where the county has no money and the amount of active travel funding from central government has been cut by, I think, was it 75% or 60%? I can't remember which. And while the City Council has made extra money available to support active travel through the community infrastructure levy plans, we are in a world where change to highways happens incrementally. And obviously you need to start with the end in mind, but presumably it is that sort of synergistic partnership with what's going on through the movement strategy in a way that reflects the realities of local government funding that we are working on at the moment. Is that?
That's great.
Good.
Leading question.
Yeah, slightly leading questions. Are there any other questions on the subject of movement? There were some bigger questions raised, and I know that Councillor Godfrey has been saving himself up for this point, so I think we're sort of, it is very reasonable given the absolute central importance of this project to us, that any other questions that people may have about where we are get asked. So Councillor Godfrey, you've been raring at the leash. Your turn, I think.
No, I'm glad I waited till after you'd quizzed the poor unfortunate on his catechism, and he passed with flying colours, obviously, but he has rejected the devil in all his forms. The Venn diagram towards the end of the presentation demonstrated a good summary of what has really been an excellent information gathering exercise. And as a business analyst for the last 35 years, I admire the work which has gone into this. An excellent approach, and some very interesting comments come through. Although the use of colours is far more subtle than I would ever use. But I also know that when you come to the end of a particular phase in the project, you have to consider what you've learned in relation to the business case. And my particular interest is the investment the council is putting into this. What we learned from this consultation in relation to the viability, the financial impact of on the project of these this initial framework. Is the viability circle some way off to the left and not actually interconnected, or what can we learn about the viability?
Thank you, Councillor. I think the key word that you used there was, when you get to the end of the process, you need to look at the business case, and that's not where we are. It's very much on our mind. It will form part of our development delivery plan.
Any other sort of wider questions? Well, I think that we have inherited a few from the deputations that were made. So I would like to go through those and make sure we've covered them. And although some of them I think may involve asking questions of the strategic director or even Councillor Porter, which is, so if we take Councillor Lee's point, I mean, there's a lot of comments, but how are we taking a joined up approach? And there was even discussion about how do we look at a development framework for the entire district. I mean, what is that? Is it the local plan? I mean, maybe that's the clarification I'm looking for.
Thank you. So the overarching approach, as you say, is controlled within the council through having one leader for each project, which Mr. Bakey is currently. I say currently, sorry, Mr. Bakey is leading on. That sounded leading as well, didn't it? To make sure we've got all of the regen projects in one place. And we very much use our framework project planning. So all of our projects have to sit on the same framework and go through the same process. So they're all discussed at the same time strategically through our Programmes and Capital Board, which has your senior team on, including the Chief Exec who chairs. So internally, we sit and look at all of our projects overarching to make sure that they're knitted together. We then, as Councillor Lee correctly identified, we then meet with Hampshire and sit with a regeneration board and yourself, leader, and the leader of Hampshire occasionally on that board, where we look at the wider projects across Hampshire and join our projects together to make sure we all understand how the projects are working together. I would add, as small district authority, all district authorities, none of us are huge. It's always the same people because we're the size we are. So if we're talking about movement, there are 2 or 3 key officers that work across all of the projects. If we're talking about the climate, 2 or 3 key officers that advise us on our carbon use. So we're not a scattered team that works independently. We dip back into our services for our projects and bring them forwards. So that's how we work and pull programming together and make sure, and that's where our risk registers sit as well. So the risks sit at service level and at project level. So you're going to look at a risk register for station approach in a minute. That gives you an example. Risks are then escalated up into a corporate level, and you look at that through audit and governance. So we have the flow of risks. We don't have a separate risk register outside of that because it's very important that we keep control of our risks and we understand who's lead on them and where they go. So they are at service or project level, escalated up into corporate level, and that's where we look at the high level risks. You've spoken about a district-wide plan, a master plan, and you're right to identify that it is the local plan. Shall I continue answering? Sorry, or was that okay? So our local plan is very much where we are placemaking and where we are looking across the whole of the district and making sure the balance of employment and homes, and of course a major part of our local plan coming forwards in the next year, the transport assessment, all fits together within the local plan. So that's where the resources are placed, and that's where we look at things broadly. I would add, I was very pleased to be invited to the Winchester Trust AGM last night, and it was very, very interesting talk as well at the meeting yesterday. And I know Matt was there from Jigsaw as well, and it was identified that if councils, let's not just pick ours, but if councils had delivered maybe what they'd planned for 15 years ago, and some councils did, and we've got some examples of that in Winchester, but not at a major scale, of out of town, big shopping centres that only deal with shopping centres, or we discussed John Lewis, we discussed Debenhams last night. Those developments that you might have thought when you were doing a master plan for a large area would be for 100 years need to be evolved now, 10, 15 years later, and that wasn't foreseen. So the methodology we're using here is that stop, listen, and take the incremental approach. Stop, listen, and take the incremental approach is very much the approach we're taking. And I don't currently have a recommendation for you that we stop, do a major master plan over a long period of time that will either then sit on the shelf because it would be extremely expensive, or we would spend time justifying why we've moved away from it because time's moved forward and what people need have moved forwards. So at the moment, an overarching district plan on top of the local plan is not in our recommendations to you. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you very much indeed. And presumably also there's a dependency on LTP4, which is the county's plan for the strategic framework for highways, which, as I understand it, is currently stuck in the Department for Transport. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Can I also add that Councillor Lee mentioned about having each master plan for the district having to include carbon impacts and biodiversity impacts. Well, they do, and they will, and they are required to do so. So it's really important that that's exactly what the local plan does, that everywhere has the same requirements. And that's a very important part of it. So they don't need to have a master plan one. There is one for the district.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I mean, we are attempting, and so far, indeed, we're even looking to strengthen to have one of the greenest local plans in the country, with amongst the highest carbon standards, if not the highest carbon standards, in terms of what we're trying to do within the district. Also setting very ambitious objectives for biodiversity, blue and about 23 biodiversity policies and lots of carbon policies. So, and I know, Councillor Porter, that as part of Reg 19, if anything, we'll be looking to make those even more ambitious and stronger than they are now. There was a point raised by Councillor Lee on the subject of climate change and carbon in the risk register. Is that something we presumably have it within the overall risk register, but is that something that we should consider more specifically, perhaps?
Thank you. Yes, it's in the overarching risk register for a general point around the impact of the climate emergency and the climate crisis, and how we react to that. But I would also add to that that it's within our policies, as Councillor Porter said, on how we are addressing the climate change and how we are, sort of forward looking. And as you said quite rightly, we're about to discuss this afternoon the next iteration of our policy making on our local plan policies. So you find it in at least those two places.
Thank you very much. And in terms of that risk register, I mean, presumably we're seeing a risk register for station approach today, and it's possibly a question for Mr. Bakey. I mean, when will we also be seeing the risk register for Central Winchester Regeneration at some future point?
Chair, I believe it was presented in June to the committee, so we'll probably bring it back in January as part of the next meeting.
Thank you very much indeed. I think there were some wider questions which about affordable housing and whether we should be looking at framework models or other such things. I mean, I met the secretary, one of the government minister responsible for hospital building at Basingstoke recently, which is looking at a prefabricated, templated approach. Is that, it's not really something for this meeting, so maybe I'll take that away. Knowing the sensitivities on planning, we will need an approach to social housing that is sensitive to place but also consistent. But we should be mindful of, are there ways through smart standardization, buying with others to reduce cost. But we need to balance this respect for our planning process as well as our ambitions on cost. I don't know if this is one where Mr. Smithers and Mr. Woolgar has any perspective in terms of, are there trends in social housing construction or housing construction generally that we need to be aware of, with the being mindful of the need to be very respectful of the place and the sensitivities that people have about appearance and other such things.
I don't think we're there yet. I think that's something that we can certainly talk about. I mean, a prefabricated modular approach, volumetric modular, you do see just around, but actually it has a tend or a drift towards the more expensive rather than the less expensive. On a volumetric modular project, you'd expect to see cost savings through time rather than through actual capital expenditure. But there are other forms of innovative approaches that we're certainly happy to take a look at.
Very much indeed, and I will certainly, I'll pass on Councillor Lee's conversations, maybe to the social housing team. It might be a conversation to have with Councillor Westford, or with Councillor Westwood, who's the portfolio holder for our social housing programme, or Mr. Hendy, who is the director responsible for our social housing programme. I think we've probably covered everything. Are there any final thoughts or comments from colleagues? Councillor Godfrey.
A general question, Mr. Chairman. At the last meeting, the development agreement had not been signed. Have we got confirmation that it has been signed now?
Mrs. Adey, I think this is one you can provide an update on.
So it doesn't have an ink signature on it yet, but we are agreed on all the terms, so it's with the lawyers to finalise and be signed. No, we're working on them line by line. We're nearly there.
Any other further comments? Well, first of all, can I thank our colleagues from Jigsaw, Mr. Woolgar, Mr. Smithers, for coming along, and for the work that you're doing. I think we've had a good update. It's good to see that things are moving ahead. It's good to have reassurance that you're tied into the City of Winchester movement strategy and the other developments that are happening in the city, and that it's working in a way that is consistent with what you're hearing from local people, which is that we need to get on with it, but we need to do things in an organic and incremental way. You've talked a lot about the Commonplace website. For those listening online, it is cwr.commonplace.is. And I would advise people to go and sign up to it, as I have. But I would like to thank everybody for presenting today and for the update you've given and the reassurance of the progress that we continue to make. I suspect we're just being asked to note this report. Cabinet, are you happy to note the report that we've received? Thank you very much indeed. So we'll now move on to the next item, which is this. So you're welcome to stay, and in fact, given that we're talking about the importance of remaining joined up, I would encourage you to stay while we have a quick run through the Station Approach project. Now we have two parts to this presentation. We have the project update, which I think is relatively straightforward, and then the risk register. Now the risk register is showing, well, we'll get on to that. it has two spreadsheets. It has the strategic risks, which I think shows the level of risk at the start of the project, a mixture of what we have done and what we will do in order to reduce that risk level. And then the stage 2 risks are the ones, if I've understood correctly, that essentially are ones that reflect what's happened since we've gone through the first gate of the project. Mrs. Taylor, if you could take us through, through the presentation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair. So a short presentation on the progress that we've made on the station approach since Cabinet made the decision back in July that we will progress to stage 2 of the station approach project, which is to produce a concept master plan for the overarching station approach area. This slide that you see here, committee has seen it before. For those of you that haven't, it's a slide that shows the journey that the council, together with stakeholders and the wider community, will go on to produce the development on station approach. You can see from the arrow that we're now at that procurement stage of the concept master plan. And as Ms. Adey referred to earlier, at each stage of the project, we're stopping, we're listening, we're making sure that there's a continued business justification to continue with the project. So once the concept master plan has been developed, it will go to Cabinet for endorsement, and that will be the next gate to see if we're satisfied that the project should continue onwards. So as we said, we're at the moment, we're procuring for the concept master plan. So we're procuring a multidisciplinary team. The tender opportunity was advertised on the council's portal on the 21st of August. I'm very pleased to say that we've received 16 submissions by the deadline of the 25th of September. And we are now in the evaluation stage, looking at those tenders. Whilst I can't say any more about the procurement, what I can say is that I'm pleased that out of the 16 submissions that we've received, there is a good cross-section between both local and national companies, both large and small medium enterprise agencies. So once we've concluded that evaluation, we expect to have the team in place to commence the work on the master plan in November. And then I look forward to coming back in January to update you on the work that has been done between November and January. We'll be looking at June 24 for our initial public engagement on that draft concept master plan, and then the further public engagement once we've listened to what people have said on the draft master plan in September and October, with the expectation that it'll be early in 2025 when the master plan will go to Cabinet for endorsement. So that's it on the update, and then you've also had, as the chair has said, the copy of the risk register for station approach, both the strategic overarching risks and the more immediate risks for carrying out the concept master plan. So very happy to have discussion about that with you.
Good, thank you very much indeed. So on the first stage part of the presentation, the station approach project upgrade, are there any questions or comments? Oh, Councillor Cromwell.
Thank you.
But the current phase we're going through is procuring the skills and resources to develop the concept master plan. I think it's worth reminding all of us, and I apologise if I've forgotten some of the content from the last presentation on the station approach, but really remind us of the importance and the value of having that concept master plan in terms of how it will frame the future development and in effect deliver the long-term value for the broader community and broader area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So the station approach area is one that is identified within the local plan as an area for development and therefore would require a master plan for the overarching area rather than a site-by-site basis to be developed. So that's the first point. The second point is that there are a number of sites within the station approach area, and having an overarching master plan for the whole area will set out how those sites need to work together. So we're developing a place, not just developing a parcel of land. And I think the third point to make, one that we've heard from both City of Winchester Trust today and also Councillor Lee and Councillor Thompson, is about the connectivity between and across the area. So whilst the master plan for station approach is a master plan for that particular site area and similarly with the central Winchester area, those plans aren't being developed in isolation. They are needing to talk to one another in the connectivity, both in terms of movement but also in terms of public realm. So you don't stand on one paving stone and step onto an entirely different one across the way. And as we know from Central Winchester colleagues, they're at the early stage of their process, but we're already starting to have the talks about how the importance of the station approach master plan and the importance of the Central Winchester master plan talk to one another.
Thank you. That's really helpful, because I think sometimes those of us who work as like lay people or the community out there sometimes think it's just about putting a building on a particular site, and they don't think about how things relate to each other and some of those issues around connectivity and how things all play and integrate together. So thanks for explaining that. Thank you.
Porter.
Thank you. I think it's also really important to, and it's all of those things. And I think that's encapsulated really in the vision for what that whole area has to incorporate. So it isn't just as you described, it's not just a series of buildings, you put up a building here and a building there. It's a vision of what you want that area to do as well. That's really important. And that comes out within the concept master plan before you start the final detail of the planning.
I'm going to argue with that. Good. Don't worry, Councillor Porter, I will never argue with you on anything. I know who would win and it isn't me. Okay, so no more comments or questions. Did I see a finger poised to? No. So the next item is, or the next area to look at is the risk register. Do people have any questions on the risk register? Which one are we going for first? Councillor Edwards.
Okay, thank you. A layperson's question. When I opened up the risk register and I saw a column almost entirely red, I thought we shouldn't be going here, should we? But then, of course, when you read the mitigation columns, you begin to understand how the reds has become orange and things are at least anticipated, and controls and adjustments are in there. But I guess what's worrying me a bit, what I perhaps need to be pointed towards, is reassurance that in making all these mitigations, in order to get the project remaining viable, we're not compromising the aspirations that drove us into the project in the first place. You know, the range, we have an acknowledgement right at the beginning that the range of appetites to develop this site is less than or more focused, shall we say, less wide ranging than we had imagined at the beginning. That's really important to know. But so the check is, you know, are those appetites still in the right places for us? And I also noted here that there are references to, you know, to choosing the right time for this project. And that seems to be something that's absolutely critical. I'm not sure how that gets reflected in a risk register, because it's not saying we do or don't go ahead. It's just, you know, I think we're going to a long period of something emerging that we haven't quite got right yet, and we need to be prepared for a complex conversation. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, but I hope that was some sense in that.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Edwards. Yes, red on a risk register. As a programme manager, if I didn't see any red on a register, I'd be extremely concerned. You know, what are they covering up, or have they really looked at these issues seriously? So red shouldn't be something that we should shy away from. But you would be very worried if after mitigation you've still got a lot of red on a register. So that would be the first point on that. You're quite correct in terms of the vision and aspirations that we've got for our city are really high, and they should be. And we don't want to water things down just to get things over the line. And that's why in a couple of the risks where we say that because of the viability that we're experiencing at the moment in these difficult economic times, it might be right to wait 6-12 months until the time is right, and that would then ensure that we're still getting the product that we want and that's worthy of the city.
Councillor Cremorson.
Perhaps I could develop a little bit on Councillor Edwards' questioning and your answer there. And it's maybe to help me. I've got a background in IT-based projects and sort of been through product development over many years, and where there's a stage gate process. And of course, in the private sector, you don't have to have this tiresome process of democracy and making it all visible. You can hide it behind the scenes in your own organisational structures. So I guess I had the same reaction as Councillor Edwards to the red, and your answer, yeah, if there's no red, that's almost a sign of problem. But I guess my question is here, to what extent is this the form of communication, the form of the risk register, is that kind of laid out in terms of these are obligations as a public body that we need to express it in this way? We need to show the risk register and how we had red and how we have now got to amber. I'm hoping some of those things will go green in future, but is that something we're going to expect to see as we go forward? We'll have the whole thing laid out in more and more of an eye chart, but you know, it's a struggle to read it because it gets wider and wider. Is that what we're going to see? And is that all laid out by, if you like, legal obligations for us to present it in that way? Thank you.
It isn't a legal obligation to present the risk register in this way, but it is best practice. And there are different forms of presenting a risk register in terms of the categorisation. Some people use a 5x5 model to get to a different score, and there's different ones. But ultimately, this one is a best practice model that's been selected by the council, and it's in the council's project management methodology that all major projects will be presenting a risk register on a regular basis. We as an authority for major projects present our updated risk register on a monthly basis to our boards, and on a quarterly basis to the council's programme management board. And the terms of reference for this group has included seeing reviews of the major projects, which will include a risk register.
Yeah, that's really helpful to know, and I think it has the positive side of being extremely transparent. People can dig into it and see what's happened. I would have hated to have to do that in the private sector. That would have been awful.
Councillor Godfrey, did you have your hand up a moment ago?
I did, thank you. I was worrying that Councillor Edwards was asking, I was going to say completely the wrong question, but actually it's the other part of the question which I was concerned about. The risk register shows a magnificent step forward and reduction in risk, which I can't equate to what I was shown from a capacity study, which showed that some of the sites, there were possible schemes that wouldn't lose very much money. But that's far from saying that they're now affordable or unlikely or highly unlikely to be unaffordable, or that the construction costs are no longer likely to be a barrier, but now are unlikely to be a barrier to delivering a successful, viable scheme. What this risk register seems to be saying is that the pressure's off financially, and ignores the fact we still have these aspirations that we want to achieve, but it could be far too expensive because the capacity study rules them out. We're not going to be able to deliver the high quality, low environmental impact developments that are likely to cost an awful lot more in the current construction market, but what we want to achieve. So, why is the capacity study being used as a mitigation of such impact on the risk register to leave that first and third risk on this list so heavily mitigated?
Mr. Taylor, do you want to answer that? Mr. Bakey, you're all loitering with your fingers on buzzers. Oh, sorry. Do you want to respond to that, or
I would like to respond to that, because I think, and maybe then officers can say whether I'm right or wrong on this, but and I think there is a problem in terms of how this comes across and how it's produced. But I mean, fundamentally, your risk score in the first line is when you know nothing. From what I can make out, it's right at the beginning, and you look at all these things, and all these things are a problem. The capacity study has reduced the risk, but it hasn't reduced it. It's gone from red to amber. It hasn't gone from red to green, and I think that's the key. If you have a gated process, which is the way we're looking at it. The first stage was the capacity study. The capacity study reduced the risk of the project to a great enough extent to go to the next stage, but not to take the so the big investment decisions at that stage. And if the master plan doesn't bring the risk down and the circumstances have changed, we don't go through the next stage. But we need, there was a sufficient reduction in risk in the process that I think this shows that is worth going to the next stage. I think there is an argument that says, is there any point once you've done the capacity study in showing the initial risk? You say, this is where we are at the next stage, but what we're not showing on here is the further actions and where we would hope that would reduce the risk to. So I do have some questions about how it's presented, because of what it seems to mix across the two columns, the residual risk and the initial risk, is that it seems to mix things that we've already done and other mitigations that will happen in the future. And it might be helpful to have a third one in the middle that says, sort of, right, with what we've done, we've reduced it to this, or even start from that point. We've done this, and this is the risk currently with the project, and further mitigation might reduce it. So that's sort of my response to that conversation. But I think officers may have further to add to that.
Mr. Taylor is straining at the lead.
Thank you, Councillor Cookley and Godfrey. Very, very helpful points. And in terms of the capacity study, that's exactly what the purpose of it was to see if we could progress to the next stage, if it gave us enough comfort. And while some sites in there are clearly still red, we wouldn't have had sufficient comfort to go forward on those, like Network Rail didn't on their sites. The other sites do give us the comfort to progress to the next stage, which is the important point to make. There are a number of risks that were closed that related to the work that we did in stage 1 of the project, and because they're closed, they're not on here, but there's another tab that shows the closed risks, and had I brought that along, you would have seen that there was some that related to the previous work that had been closed, and the ones that are on here are remaining for this stage. And where we've split it between the strategic risks and the stage 2 risks is to try and strike that balance between the risks that will remain throughout the entire project, like viability will, and those that relate specifically to the work in stage 2, such as procuring the master planners to do that stage 2 work.
Sorry,
Mrs. Adey.
just to agree and with both speakers on that point. We discussed this at officer level, so your feedback's really helpful, because there is no risk at the moment of us taking forward a non-viable development, because you haven't given us permission to take forward any development. We are only working on the next stage. So it was our first iteration under my guide was just the stage 2, was just, what will stop us getting to the end of this stage. But we felt that wasn't, and with the teams lead actually, we felt that wasn't quite transparent enough, coming back to your point that you can't see the whole project, you can't see what risks you're looking at. That's our presentation of sort of the whole piece. And the second piece, so if you look at the scales we use, one of the financial risks that makes many of these go red is the significant risk of loss of more than £2 million, which would be easy to do on a non-viable scheme. Very easy to do. So we have to sit there in red, but the current risk of you moving forward with a non-viable scheme is nil because you've given us no permission to move forward with any scheme, thus the mitigation. So it's been really helpful to hear what we've written in there and how that translates. And I think that is helpful and something we could improve on. Thank you.
That's very helpful. Councillor Godfrey, you want to?
I may, I welcome the clarifications. What Councillor Cutler suggested would be very useful if we could in future have the risk of the current risk assessment and what we would expect the risk to be after further mitigating action. And I think I've seen that in many other contexts, rather than what it was last Tuesday, which is irrelevant now. I think that's more point. I'm on a matter of principle, I think I disagree with Ms. Eady. The risk of making the decision to go forward is still there. It's not a no risk. They're unreliable. Councillors of all their ilks are unreliable in their decision making, and that is a huge risk.
I realise, Councillor Godfrey, you might want to pull an HS2 on this one, although if you could not leave the question open for weeks and weeks on end while you're making your mind up, that would be greatly appreciated. I think, but on a more serious note, I think you've raised a really important thought, which we somehow need to capture, which is, I mean, firstly, I think there is the point about almost being clear about what has been the impact of things we have already done to mitigate and what is the remaining mitigation that needs to be taken, and being clear about those two things. And that feels something that would be helpful for our decision making. I think the other point you touched on, which sort of tied into a point that was made by Councillor Edwards, is a useful one. And actually, this could be one where having everybody at the table is helpful, which is the capacity study was done at a time when interest rates were at their worst, when construction costs were out of control, as we looked at it, and where commercial rents and just the general revenue that people could expect to get off development was at its worst. So there was this kind of perfect storm moment. And at that stage, we still managed to have something that showed there was potential for development. What one hears is that in the way that markets tend to, there is now a process of correction going on, in the sense that we are, you know, there is the trajectory of interest rates may no longer be continuously upwards. And we are starting to hear that some construction costs are coming down, which is why it's useful to have industry experts at the table. And I suppose one question I have is, you know, we did a capacity study that showed viability in the worst of all possible circumstances, which in itself is encouraging. But actually, as the situation eases, are we able to make sure that we capture the fuller aspiration of what we're able to seeking to do in the way that Councillor Godfrey and Councillor Edwards have referred to? Have we painted ourselves into a corner, or are we able to take a slightly more expansive view as we go forward that reflect that sort of almost perfect storm that we were in when we did the capacity study is starting to recede into the past? And perspective on any wider perspective on how the market situation generally is trading would be useful. So I suppose that was a question to Mr. Baker.
Can I take it first, and I think it is really helpful having colleagues from Jigsaw here. I think what we can assure you all is that we will continue to look at the viability question. As you say, it was done at a point in time. That good practice as we go through, and with the design team we will appoint, we continue to look at the viability using up-to-date information on costs and values, because things will change. What we do have is a set of delivery aspirations that were set down in the first stage of the work, that they are constant throughout the second stage. That's what we've seen, that was the instruction and the brief to the people who have tendered for that piece of work is that that work is there, it's already been agreed as a bare minimum, so we can actually look at the viability going forward. I'll let these gentlemen say where their take is on cost and values in the market at the moment more widely, because I think they're probably closer to it than we are.
I think, if anything, the last sort of 8 years has taught us crystal ball gazing is a very, very hazardous occupation. I'll offer my 2 pennies worth only, just as observation. I suppose that the continuing increase in interest rates, it has an impact, most obviously at the sort of the tail end of a development cycle, the impacting on sales absorption and the ability for people to afford the homes that are available due to mortgage costs, together with the cost of living crisis and so on and so forth. At a certain point in time, that has an impact on an earlier part of the development cycle, as fewer projects start on site. Actually, the competition is brought to bear on contractors because there's less work available, and that's where you start to see an impact, a negative influence on the material price, which has an inflationary pressure. Actually, the competition starts to have a deflationary pressure, and I think we're sort of coming to a point now where construction pricing will start to see some movement as a result of those conflicting pressures. I think some of the inflationary pressures on materials has slowed over the last few years. I think the BCIS is showing that now. Their forecast is still for increase, but at a slower rate. And I think that the competition point will probably start to see that have an active influence as well over the next 12 to 18 months. And I think that it's important to think about wherever one is on the development cycle, and actually entering into master planning and planning. This is not a bad time to do that, given there are many years to sort of run before you start to look at buying construction work. It's not a bad time to be doing it.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Are there any other points or comments? Councillor Porter.
Thank you. One of the, and that's a really useful and helpful conversation actually, because I think it was the point that we all looked at it and thought, well, we know we've got so far along that line. What does that mean for the risks going forward? But one of the things that I would just like to explore really is the impact of design on the whole lifetime value of those buildings. So this is a complicated site in the sense that it has a number of different sites, not just the one site, and the impact of whether that each building will have a lifetime value, lifetime will be different. Are we expecting them to have different lifetimes? Are we? It's really about the carbon impact and the value for money impact, and how are we going to be setting that within the master, or would we be setting that within a concept master plan process, as well as bearing in mind the station is sitting there as a building that's been there a very long time and still has a use, but there are other buildings that have a flexibility of use. But I just wanted to just explore that lifetime of those buildings.
Thank you. Yes, very important. One of the tasks that we're setting the master planning team is to look at the existing buildings within the area in terms of are they suitable for retrofitting, etc. In terms of new buildings that go up, we'd be asking them to look at flexibility being a key, given that it's a 10-year master plan. Within the concept master plan stage, whilst we're not looking at detailed design, so we've said that we'd expect commercial properties to be BREEAM and houses to have LETI standards. We wouldn't be at the sort of detailed design stages yet. However, we would be expecting the design team to look at orientation of buildings, for instance, in terms of energy and heat and so forth. So you're quite correct, even though we're at an early stage, it does have an impact on the longer term carbon footprint. So is an integral part that we built into the brief that the team will need to address.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Are there any more hands or any more comments that people want to make? Otherwise, that's been very helpful. And I realise we went sort of beyond the immediate scope of what was outlined in the presentation and started asking a bunch of other questions as well. But I think your answers have provided a lot of reassurance, and thank you also, Mr. Woolger, for your comments as well, although we recognise that you're making them as a personal observer of the market situation and not as a formal policy statement by Igloo. On behalf of Jigsaw, but it is greatly appreciated, your contribution as well. So again, colleagues, I think we're asked to note that particular agenda item, and I would like to thank officers for all their work in bringing it forward. So colleagues, are you happy to note that report?
Note it.
Thank you very much indeed. And I believe at that point we have run out of agenda items. So I would like to thank our partners from Jigsaw for coming along and contributing to both parts of the meeting. I would like to thank Mr. Beveridge for his public deputation, Councillor Lee for his councillor deputation. I'd like to thank colleagues on the committee for their input and discussion, and officers, of course, for all their preparatory work that's gone into it. And on that note, I declare the meeting closed.